Deep beneath the ocean's surface, hidden from the world, lay the mythical city of Atlantis. It was a kingdom of golden towers, swirling currents, and strange technology far beyond modern science. For centuries, it remained undisturbed. Until now. Far above, in their secret headquarters, the Penguins of Madagascar were preparing for one of their most daring missions yet. A distress signal had come from the depths of the ocean, one they couldn't ignore. The message was garbled, but one thing was clear. A penguin prince was trapped in Atlantis, and time was running out. The mission seemed straightforward. Infiltrate Atlantis, rescue the prince, and escape before being detected. But nothing ever went according to plan for the penguins. This mission would be no different. Equipped with their custom-built submarine, which was barely holding together, the team descended into the abyss. The water darkened around them, the crushing pressure bending the metal of their vehicle. Strange, glowing creatures darted past, watching them with beady eyes. Then, suddenly, a whirlpool formed beneath them, sucking them downward at terrifying speed. Their submarine spun wildly, tossed like a toy in a storm. They fought to maintain control, but it was useless. The force pulled them deeper, deeper, until at last, they were spat out into a massive underwater cavern. Before them, Atlantis rose in all its ancient glory. A city of shimmering coral streets, towering spires made of glowing stone, and mysterious floating orbs that pulsed with energy. But something was wrong. The penguins had expected guards, soldiers, or even an ancient king to confront them. Instead, what they found was a massive party. Bright lights flashed across the city, music blared through the water, and strange little yellow creatures danced atop the palace steps. They wore royal robes, very much the wrong size, and on their heads sat golden crowns encrusted with pearls. The Minions had taken over Atlantis. The penguins watched in stunned silence as the Minions clumsily tripped over priceless artifacts, juggled glowing crystals, and played catch with ancient relics that probably held immense power. This was going to be a disaster. As the penguins stared at the scene before them, they realized the situation was far worse than expected. The Minions, somehow, had been crowned rulers of Atlantis, and from the way they were acting, they had no idea what that meant. Across the Golden Palace steps, Minions danced in ridiculous outfits. One wore a giant seashell as a helmet, another was using the royal trident as a backscratcher, and a group of them were riding on giant jellyfish like they were bumper cars. The Atlantean citizens, a mix of fish-like humanoids and armored sea creatures, stood off to the side, watching the chaos unfold with expressions that were equal parts confusion and horror. The penguins needed to act fast. Somewhere in this city, the lost penguin prince was trapped, and they had no idea what the Minions had done with him. If he was locked in the dungeon, lost in the royal palace, or, worse, mistaken for a minion and sent off on some ridiculous errand, they had a serious problem. Moving with practiced stealth, the penguins slipped into the city's outer corridors, weaving through the shadows. They needed information, and fast. They spotted a worried Atlantean servant clutching a scroll, nervously dodging the Minions as they built a banana catapult in the middle of the palace courtyard. The servant was muttering something about the prisoner. That was all they needed to hear. With military precision, the penguins launched themselves into action. Using a well-placed distraction, which involved a stolen minion crown and a very large fish, they managed to corner the Atlantean servant and silently demand answers. The truth was worse than they imagined. The penguin prince was being held in the deepest part of the royal vault, guarded by enchanted chains that could only be unlocked by the royal trident. The same trident one of the Minions had been using to scratch its back. The plan was clear: infiltrate the palace, retrieve the trident, and free the prince before the Minions accidentally triggered an ancient Atlantean catastrophe. But before they could move, a loud, echoing boom shook the city. The Minions had accidentally activated something big. From the depths of Atlantis, a massive shadow began to rise, and the penguins knew they were running out of time. The moment the echoing boom rumbled through Atlantis, the penguins knew things had just gone from bad to catastrophic. From the depths of the city's ruins, something massive was rising. A shadowy colossus with glowing green eyes, encrusted in barnacles and ancient gold. It was an Atlantean guardian, a legendary sea monster built to defend the city in times of crisis. Unfortunately, the minions had awoken it by accident. The city's residents screamed in panic, fleeing in every direction. The minions, however, didn't seem to understand the danger. One was waving at the beast, another was offering it a banana, and a third was trying to braid its seaweed-covered hair. The penguins had to act fast. The guardian's massive tentacles coiled through the city, crushing buildings, sweeping away statues, and knocking minions into the air like popcorn kernels. Meanwhile, the trident, the key to freeing the lost penguin prince, was still in the hands of a particularly clueless minion, who was now running around in circles, screaming nonsense. The penguins had two problems. First, they needed the trident. Second, they needed to stop the sea monster before Atlantis crumbled into the ocean. With military precision, they split up. Kowalski took charge of retrieving the trident. Using a well-calculated trajectory, a stolen sea scooter, and an octopus wearing a hat, he launched himself at the minion, snatching the trident midair before crash landing into a pile of golden coins. Private was in charge of keeping the civilians safe, ushering panicked Atlanteans out of the way before they got caught in the whirlpool of destruction the Guardian was creating. Rico, their demolition expert, was having the time of his life. Laughing maniacally, he began launching everything explosive he could find: enchanted pearls, volatile seaweed bombs, and a particularly dangerous cursed fish at the monster. The Guardian roared in fury, but it wasn't going down that easily. That left Skipper to come up with a plan. He knew they had one shot at this. If they didn't take down the Guardian and free the Penguin Prince in time, the entire city would be lost. Their only hope was to use the minions, who were, despite their chaos, surprisingly unstoppable when they had a goal. So Skipper made a very risky move. He grabbed a minion, held up the trident, and pointed at the Guardian. The minions immediately got the wrong idea, thinking this was all some big royal game. With loud battle cries, they charged toward the giant sea monster. Some rode jellyfish into battle, others catapulted themselves using seaweed slingshots, and a group of particularly ambitious ones built an entire submarine out of discarded Atlantean gold in under 30 seconds. The chaos was unstoppable. The minions swarmed the Guardian in waves of ridiculous attacks, tickling it, tying its tentacles in knots, and building a makeshift waterslide off its head. And then, in the middle of it all, Kowalski, Rico, and Private successfully broke into the royal vault, snapped the enchanted chains, and freed the Penguin Prince. The moment the prince was free, the Guardian froze mid-rampage. Its glowing eyes dimmed. The curse was broken. With a final earth-shaking groan, the sea monster collapsed back into the depths, disappearing beneath the ruins once more. Atlantis was saved, somehow. The minions cheered, completely unaware they had almost caused a historical disaster. The penguins collapsed in exhaustion, while the Atlantean citizens looked at their so-called rulers with newfound terror. But the danger wasn't over yet, because just as things started to calm down, a deep, menacing voice echoed through the palace halls. A new threat had just arrived. And this time, just as the dust, or rather the seaweed and shattered ruins, began to settle, a deep, bone-chilling voice echoed through the grand halls of Atlantis. The remaining bits of golden coral rattled on the palace floor, and the Atlantean citizens froze in place. Something worse than a rampaging sea monster had just arrived. From the shadows of the royal throne room, a towering figure emerged. His presence so heavy that even the minions, who moments ago were trying to ride jellyfish into battle, suddenly felt uneasy. It was the true King of Atlantis, tall and imposing, with glowing emerald eyes, a flowing cape made of living sea creatures, and a crown that pulsed with raw magic. The Atlantean king had finally returned from his mysterious absence, and he looked very, very displeased. His gaze swept over the chaos before him. His once pristine city now reduced to shattered ruins. Minions parading around in golden robes, the Penguin Prince standing awkwardly nearby, and his Grand Guardian missing from its post. He took a slow, measured step forward, The Penguins knew they had approximately 3 seconds before all of them were vaporized. Without hesitation, Skipper signaled to the team, "Evacuation time." Unfortunately, the Minions, still blissfully unaware of the danger, cheered and ran toward the king, assuming he was there to throw another royal party. One particularly enthusiastic minion tossed confetti. The king's expression darkened. A single wave of his hand, and the entire throne room trembled. The Penguins barely had time to react before giant tidal waves of glowing blue water erupted from the floor, twisting like enchanted serpents. Skipper dove out of the way as a column of water nearly swallowed him whole. Kowalski, already calculating 14 different escape routes, grabbed the Penguin Prince and rolled behind a toppled golden statue. Private, still recovering from the last disaster, found himself trapped in a sudden whirlpool. And Rico? Well, Rico was currently wrestling a sentient fish spear. Meanwhile, the minions were floating helplessly in midair, trapped inside bubbles of enchanted water. The king's voice rumbled like an underwater earthquake. His piercing gaze locked onto the penguins and the lost prince. A single wave of his hand, and the entire throne room trembled. The penguins barely had time to react before giant tidal waves of glowing blue water erupted from the floor, twisting like enchanted serpents. Skipper dove out of the way as a column of water nearly swallowed him whole. It didn't take a genius to figure out what he was thinking. They were intruders. They had broken into his kingdom. They had awakened the Guardian. They had let an army of chaotic yellow creatures take over. And now, they were about to face the consequences. Skipper, thinking very quickly, grabbed the trident from Kowalski's flippers. It was their only leverage. If they could prove the Penguin Prince's rightful claim to the throne, maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't end up as fish food. But before he could even attempt a daring speech, the king lifted his hands, and the entire palace exploded into a swirling vortex of water and magic. Everything turned into chaos. The penguins were hurled into the air, the minions were bouncing like bubbles, and the entire city seemed to be collapsing around them. And worst of all, the king was preparing his final spell. A massive whirlpool of glowing energy began forming above his head, crackling with raw ancient power. If he unleashed it, Atlantis would be wiped from existence. The penguins had seconds to stop him, and unfortunately, the minions were making things worse, because one of them, still completely unaware of the life-threatening danger, had just accidentally grabbed the trident and was now using it as a backscratcher. Things were not looking good. The Atlantean king's spell grew stronger by the second. The massive whirlpool above him spun faster, crackling with energy, its force pulling in shattered debris, golden statues, and, unfortunately, a few helpless minions, who were now flailing through the air like screaming bananas. Skipper braced for impact. Kowalski calculated 37 different ways they could be annihilated. Private tried not to pass out, and Rico was chewing on something explosive, as usual. But amidst all the chaos, the minions were still completely unaware of their doom, especially the one currently holding the ancient trident. The minion blinked, tilted his head, then gave the trident a big ol' lick, as if checking to see if it tasted like bananas. That was a mistake, because the moment his tongue touched the magical metal, the trident roared to life. Golden energy surged from its core, blasting upward in a blinding column of raw power. The king froze. The whirlpool of destruction above him sputtered. The spell, so dangerously close to being unleashed, suddenly collapsed in on itself like a popped bubble. For the first time in 1,000 years, the king looked genuinely confused. Because, as ancient Atlantean law decreed, whoever wields the trident holds the power of the throne. And right now, a single giggling, one-eyed minion was holding it. The entire city of Atlantis fell into stunned silence. Even the magical fish stopped floating. The penguins exchanged horrified glances. The Atlanteans dropped to their knees. And the minions, they cheered. Their little yellow hands shot into the air. Confetti rained down from absolutely nowhere. Someone blew a party horn. And, in a horrifying twist of fate, the rest of the minions also dropped to their knees, worshipping their new minion king. The Atlantean king's eye twitched. The penguins' stomachs dropped. This was not the plan. Skipper was a lot of things: a leader, a tactician, a lover of danger. But even he didn't know how to handle a bunch of minions accidentally overthrowing an ancient civilization. The minion with the trident, now completely drunk on power, twirled it like a baton, and in doing so, accidentally triggered its magic. The air crackled. The throne room shifted, reality itself bending under the weight of its power. And then, a portal ripped open in the sky. A massive swirling vortex of golden light exploded above the palace, its energy wild and untamed. Through it, glimpses of otherworldly dimensions flickered, some beautiful, some terrifying, some that looked suspiciously like a Minion-themed amusement park. And then came the worst part. The portal began to suck everything in. Atlantis was collapsing again, but this time, not into the ocean. It was about to be sucked into a different dimension entirely, and the minions, still clueless about the horror they had unleashed, were now dancing. Because for some reason, the portal was blasting upbeat dance music. Skipper grabbed Kowalski by the collar. This was it. They had exactly 30 seconds to either close the portal, escape Atlantis, or accept their fate as permanent residents of whatever insane dimension they were about to be thrown into. No pressure. The King of Atlantis, his power stripped, stared in horror as his kingdom was being pulled into oblivion. But even he knew there was only one way to stop it. The trident. The very same trident now being used as a pogo stick by an overexcited minion. Skipper cursed under his breath and dove forward. But the minions, misinterpreting this as an act of aggression against their new king, immediately retaliated. A battle broke out, and somehow, the fate of Atlantis came down to an all-out brawl between the Penguins of Madagascar and an army of minions wearing seashell helmets. And, unfortunately, the minions were winning. The battle for Atlantis was a disaster. On one side, the Penguins, elite operatives, masters of espionage, experts in tactical warfare. On the other, the minions, small, banana-obsessed creatures with zero sense of strategy, but an unholy amount of energy and impossible luck. And yet, the minions were somehow winning. Skipper dodged a flying clam shield, narrowly avoiding a minion who had somehow tied himself into a pretzel and was rolling across the battlefield like a bowling ball. Private was caught in a net made entirely of spaghetti, frantically wriggling while a group of minions argued over whether to cook him or keep him as a pet. Kowalski had been dogpiled by 5 minions, who were now attempting to turn him into a makeshift surfboard. And Rico? Rico was having the time of his life. Laughing maniacally, he had somehow commandeered a magical Atlantean cannon and was now firing explosive coconuts at anything that moved. Unfortunately, this included both teams. Atlantis was falling apart. The portal above them was growing, swallowing entire buildings whole. And in the center of it all, the Minion King, the single most dangerous force in the universe, not because of power, but because of sheer stupidity, was still playing with the trident like a baton. The actual Atlantean king, now reduced to a sad, robe-wearing spectator, watched in horror. Skipper had had enough. With one final burst of energy, he body-slammed a minion, dodged a rogue jellyfish, grabbed Kowalski by the foot, and slid toward the Minion King with the precision of a seasoned ice skater. And then, BAM! He tackled the Minion King so hard that the trident flew into the air. The room fell silent. Everyone watched. The trident spun in slow motion, tumbling toward the ground. And then, with one last desperate leap, Private, still covered in spaghetti, snatched it. The portal shuddered, its energy flickering. Kowalski, finally freed from his minion captors, screamed calculations at lightning speed. "Private, slam the trident into the floor, now!" Private, panicked beyond reason, did exactly that. A shockwave of energy blasted across Atlantis. The portal collapsed inward, swallowing the spell, the magic, and every single thing that had gone wrong in the last hour. Boom! Atlantis stopped shaking. The minions, completely unharmed, cheered as if they had just won a game show. The Atlantean king sat down and reconsidered all of his life choices. The penguins panted, barely alive. And then, because the universe had a terrible sense of humor, the Minion King gave the trident one last poke. The ground rumbled, the palace shuddered, and suddenly, Atlantis started rising. The entire city, the lost, forgotten ancient city, was surfacing. Because the trident's final command? Make Atlantis go up. A few hours later, the world lost its collective mind when Atlantis suddenly emerged in the middle of the ocean like a confused whale. The Minions, somehow still in charge, immediately declared it an amusement park. The Atlanteans, after thousands of years of isolation, were now deeply regretting everything. The Penguins of Madagascar, exhausted, dragged themselves onto their submarine and vowed to never speak of this mission again. And the Penguin Prince? He didn't even need rescuing, because it turned out he had left Atlantis a week ago and was already back home. They had done all of this for nothing. As the Minions celebrated their accidental victory by catapulting themselves into the air, Skipper sat in silence, staring at the ocean, his soul permanently broken. Next time, he thought to himself, we let the prince save himself.
If you like this video, then do subscribe to this channel